Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending the webinar for today. We're so happy to have everyone to join us. And I would like to say that first, thank you. Thank you to everyone. And also that we are so excited to bring this event to you in honor of Black History Month celebration. My name is Margaret Taylor, Director of Student Activities and Inclusion at Jefferson Community College. And this event is brought to you as a collaboration with the Watertown Juneteenth Action Committee. And we're happy to do this because we're looking at many ways to bring awareness to diversity, inclusion, and justice, and all of the topics related so that we can have these discussions in a place where we can become more aware and more educated of various topics. So today's event is open to the public. We have our Jefferson community faculty, staff, and students, and others from across the nation joining us today as well. Bianca, I'm going to pass it on to you so you can introduce yourself.
So thank you. You mentioned the partnership with Jefferson Community College and the Watertown Juneteenth Action Committee, which is the group of volunteers in the North Country, the soldiers, veterans, local community members who help make events like this happen. The Action Committee seeks to enrich and diversify the North Country experience by intentionally drawing from the voices of African American and diasporic scholars, artists, and others in the creation of public programming. And I'm so grateful to be working with my colleague here, Margaret Taylor. Thank you so much. Well, I'm very honored to introduce Dr. Molefi Kete Asante. In his over 40 years of academic and activist work, Dr. Asante has amassed an ongoing list of accomplishments, writings, positions, awards, recognitions, too numerous to share in the limited time we have today. But here's just a few of the highlights. Dr. Asante completed his PhD with UCLA at the age of 26, and by 30, he had been appointed full professor at SUNY Buffalo. He's currently professor and chair of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University in Philadelphia. He created the first PhD program in African American Studies at Temple in 1988. He's the founder of the theory of Afrocentricity, which moves people of African descent from the margins to the center of their own historical experience, and we'll ask him more about that today. He's president of the Molefi Kete Asante Institute for Afrocentric Studies. Dr. Asante is one of the most widely cited African scholars and is recognized as one of the most influential leaders in education. He's published over 500 articles and written or co-authored more than 85 books, including his very latest, just released just a few months ago, which we have the pleasure of discussing today. Written with Temple University's Dr. Na Dove, Being Human Being, Transforming the Race Discourse. It's my pleasure to introduce to you, Dr. Molefi Kete Asante.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you, and I want to say thanks to certainly Margaret Taylor and to Bianca Ellis, to both the Jefferson Community College and the Juneteenth, the Watertown Juneteenth Action Committee. It's a wonderful thing to be here. I'm delighted. I've been looking forward to this for months, and now it is here, and it's wonderful to be here and to be speaking to the people in the North Country. We have got up this morning in Philadelphia, and we felt like we were in the North Country. It was cold today, but we're delighted that we do have sunshine. I imagine, I don't know, but I imagine that I should probably say something a few minutes, and then there will be questions and answers and that kind of thing. Is that basically, Margaret, how you want me to proceed?
Yes, please.
Okay, well, let me just say that first of all, my name, Molefi Kete Asante, is quite always revelatory, and I just came from Liberia. I was in Liberia last week, and I always start off by giving people that history because it's a part of the whole discussion of humanity. I was born actually in Valdosta, Georgia, in the South. And I migrated actually to school in Tennessee, Oklahoma, Texas, California, and then back to work in Indiana and Florida and New York State, and now in Pennsylvania. So that's a quick story there. But in 1972, I visited Ghana for the first time in West Africa. I had just finished, I'd finished school at UCLA earlier, maybe 2 or 3 years earlier. And then I decided that I would go to Ghana and other parts, 5 other countries in Africa. So when I got to Ghana, I went to the library, and I was probably, it was a little vain about this. I went to the librarian and I said, do you have my book? My book is called Rhetoric of Black Revolution, because this was the end of the 60s, and I had done communication studies, and I had tried to analyze the rhetoric that was going on in the different activist organizations. The man said, yes, we have this book. But when the book came in, we thought that the person was an Englishman. And I said, well, why did you think that? He said, because the name on the book said Arthur L. Smith. And now you're standing here and I'm looking at you and you're a Black guy. And I'm like, well, what? He said, I don't understand how you get this name, Arthur Smith. And then I had to tell him about the enslavement of Africans and the loss of our names, and how we had not gone through a period of rematriation where we regained our names and so on. So and on that same trip, I visited a city called Kumasi, which, if you've been there, it's a very old city out of the Asante kingdom, very sacred city in many ways. So I went there and I visited the Asante Hene, who was the paramount king of the Asante people. And his name was Opoku Wari II. And he said to me, he said, what day were you born on? And I said, Friday. He said, your name should be Kofi. He says, a boy born on Friday is Kofi. So he gave me the name. He said, so you're Kofi, because I had never heard of this system before, but later learned that in Ghana, they know if you're born on a certain day, female or male, you get a particular name. So then he said, you love the drum and the music of the royal house, so I'm gonna give you a name, Kete. And then I give you a common name that was like your European name, Smith, and that common name is actually Asante. It's very known in Ghana. So I was Kofi Kete Asante. And then because of the war between the Nelson Mandela's ANC, the African National Congress, and the PAC against apartheid, I took the name Molefi, which is a Southern African name from the Soto people. And that name means essentially one who keeps the traditions. So I became Molefi Kete Asante. And sometimes I say Kofi, but Molefi Kete Asante is the name that I use. I give you this background because the enslavement of African people in the Americas, and not just in the United States. I mean, sometimes when we think of the enslavement of Africans, we only think in terms of the United States, but slavery occurred in all parts of this hemisphere, whether Canada, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Venezuela, all these areas, the whole Caribbean, you had enslavement of Africans everywhere. And in fact, there are more Africans, probably, in Brazil than there are in the United States. And there are, of course, about 30% of the population of Colombia. is of African descent. So now we have this big issue here of all of these African people who essentially are moved off of their own cultural terms, moved not just off of physical terms, that is, moved from one place in Africa to a place in the Americas or in the Caribbean, but basically moved off of our religious terms, off our linguistic terms, off of the terms of even our names. Because we didn't get off the boat from Africa with a name like Mary Washington, you see? We didn't get off the boat with a name like Paul Calvin. I mean, that was not the way we got here. So when we got here in the Americas, that's when the process of what I call dislocation occurred. That is, taking us from one psychological location to another psychological location, which in many ways was oppressive to us psychologically, mentally, and spiritually. And that's why I came up in the 1980s with the theory of Afrocentricity. And what Afrocentricity says is that since we have been living in the West for so long in America, or even in Europe, or even actually, look at this, even in Africa itself, after colonization, after the colonial experiences in Africa, you had many Africans who were living right there in their own geographical location, but who were also dislocated, you see, by the educational system, by the religious system, by the imposition of a language that was different from the language of their ancestors. All these things serve to dislocate African people. This dislocation of African people meant that in order for us to interpret anything, whether it was a concept of beauty, whether it was the concept of ethics, whether it was a concept of history itself, the mission of the United States, the plan, the purpose, all these things, we had to now reassess, because by being dislocated, the African person took on all of the values and many of the characteristics of the people who had enslaved them. That is why I had the name Arthur Smith. And when I told my father I was changing my name, he said, son, I'm so happy that you're changing your name. If I had known, and this was very important to me, if I had known an African name when you were born, I would have given you one. But my experiences in Georgia, my experiences as a descendant of enslaved people had so separated me from my own understanding of my own history and culture that I had nothing to give. I could not give you that name because I didn't know the name. And of course, that's the condition of most Black people, I think, in the Americas even today. So I start with this just as sort of an approach to this subject of being human being that I wanted to talk about a little bit. And I want to talk about it in this way. I always try to begin at the beginning. They tell me, scientists do, that the universe is like 15 billion, maybe 14, 15 billion. You can take a billion, or two away. 14 to 15 billion years old. That's the universe. Mm-hmm. That the Earth itself is like 5 billion years old, 4.5 billion or 5 billion years ago. So the Earth is that old, which means the Earth has been here. Sometimes people say, well, people they're going to have war. They're going to destroy the Earth. No, they won't destroy the Earth. Earth has been here and will be here. They may destroy civilization. They may destroy current civilization, but the Earth will be here. The Earth was here even when the dinosaurs were here. 65 to 70 million years ago. And they had been on the Earth for millions of years, and then they disappeared at the with what we believe was a crash of a meteorite. So they're gone, right? But Homo sapiens are here. But Homo sapiens are not 14 billion years old as Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens are not 5 billion years old. That is, at the time of the earth, there were no, at the beginning of the earth, there were no Homo sapiens. We didn't exist. Homo sapiens, we say, are anatomically modern humans. That's a human being like we are, like everybody listening today. That's what a Homo sapien is. We all Homo sapiens. Now, here's the thing about Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens really arose only in one continent, and that continent was Africa. Now, this is really important to understand this being human being. Because Homo sapiens rose in Africa, that's around 300,000 years ago. All scientists will say that. They will tell you, well, Homo sapiens, the beginning of Homo sapiens is about 300,000 years ago. Well, there were human-like creatures before Homo sapiens, and we've heard many of these names. The oldest one, of course, was Sahelanthropus chadensis. Sahelanthropus chadensis was discovered in Chad. That's why it's chadensis. Chad is a country in the middle of Africa. They found the fossil remains of a being that was 7.2 million years old. The oldest discovery of what would be a being, a hominin. A hominin is something on the pathway to humanity, to Homo sapiens. But Homo sapiens we've only found evidence of Homo sapiens that go back to 300,000 years ago. And only in Africa. In fact, Sahelanthropus chadensis, the oldest fossil, the oldest hominin fossil, also was discovered only in Africa. Now it's very important to say this, because the question of human beings was raised by the people who introduced this whole idea of what they call polygenesis. Polygenesis means many origins, many origins. Genesis, origin or beginning. During the time of the enslavement of Africans in the United States and other places, there was a theory that Africans could not be the same as Europeans. So there had to be a creation of humanity in different parts of the world. That there's some people who were from Asia, and there was a beginning in Asia, a beginning in Europe, and a beginning in Africa, because we're too different, could not be the same. Well, interestingly enough, in the 1980s, two researchers, and then began many other researchers. And then after that, of course, the creators of the Human Genome Project discovered something very interestingly. And that is, they discovered that all human beings around the world have the DNA that traces back to one African woman in East Africa. That essentially the 7 billion people on the earth today come from one source. So it's not polygenesis, it is monogenesis. It's one beginning. And we all go back to that 300,000 years or so old woman whose children and children, 1,000 generations or more, were in fact the very ones who populated the earth. That's science. Let me tell you what else science says. Science says that 3/4 of the time that humans, Homo sapiens, that's the humans, that 3/4 of the time that Homo sapiens have lived on the earth, Homo sapiens lived only in Africa. So even if we said 240 or 230,000 years of the life of Homo sapiens, that's us human beings living today, was lived in Africa, that means that all that time, there were only Africans. There were no people in Asia. There had been hominins. There were no people in Europe. There had been hominins. You had different groups that they have discovered in different parts. But even those discoveries, for example, the Neanderthals, those people originally, those hominins, they were not anatomically modern humans. They were not Homo sapiens. The Neanderthals were not Homo sapiens. They're different. But the Neanderthals also came from Africa. So all the oldest hominins and the oldest Homo sapiens, the only Homo sapiens, came from Africa. So we all Homo sapiens today. That's who we are. We did not migrate out of Africa until 70,000 years ago. 70,000 years ago, everybody in the world, before 70,000 years ago, everybody in the world was Black. There's no other color, no other people, 70,000 years ago. 3 or 4 days ago, I was giving a lecture. They asked me to give a lecture at Temple, here where I teach, on critical race theory, just to talk about that and to have a conversation. And ultimately, one of my colleagues, a man by the
We frozen?
We just deal with this question of humanity. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you very much. Dan Goldberg asked, he said, why can't we just all say that we're Africans? If we all are Africans, then we can deal with this. He says, at the elementary school, we should be teaching our children, you are African, your ancestry comes from Africa. If we start with that, it produces something different in the minds of people later on. And I think, and I told Dan, I thought it was a brilliant question, a comment to what I was saying, and he's right. Now, I haven't gotten to the meat of my point yet, but let me get to it, and then I'll stop and ask with a question. The Homo sapiens who lived in Africa 300,000 years ago until around 70,000 years ago when there was migration out of Africa. There was not migration. All Homo sapiens didn't leave Africa. Sometimes people say, well, humanity migrated out of Africa. Oh, no, Africa is still the most diverse continent on the face of the earth. The human genetic pool in Africa is more diverse in that one continent than all the rest of the world put together. That's how diverse Africa is. So, and then all the people in Africa, earlier Homo sapiens, didn't leave. They spread throughout the continent of Africa, and then they left 70,000 years ago to go to other continents and to be affected by the climate and various other conditions that change the nature of people in terms of how they look, physical and so on. But ultimately, at the base of all of us, we are 99.9% the same. So now, where does this question of race comes from? How do we get here? When the first Africans, when the first Homo sapiens were in Africa, they recognized that human beings were different. They knew that there were some people who were short, some people who were tall. The Tutsi people are the tallest people in the world. Just on the average, the Tutsi people, where we get the Watutsi from in East Africa. The Twa people the so-called pygmy, which is not a good word. We call them Twa, T-W-A. The Twa people are the shortest people in the world. They're Homo sapiens. They're both Homo sapiens. Some are tall, some are short, but they're Homo sapiens. They're not a different species. They're the same thing. They had the same DNA. But even though they were different in that sense, the African people did not place rankings on human beings because of their color, their height, the color of their eyes, the texture of their hair, nothing like that. There was no, people knew there were some people lighter and some people darker, but they didn't say because you were lighter, you put in this category, because you were darker, you in this category. They didn't do that. That was not that. For 240,000 years, Africans didn't do that. Homo sapiens didn't do that. That was not a part of what we brought as Homo sapiens to the earth. We did not bring this, we brought differentiation because there was differentiation in how people looked and how they spoke and languages and how the people were isolated from other people, all that, but not ranking. It is this creation of this concept of conquest, which was the dividing concept for human beings. And this was not introduced, as I said, by Africans. It was, and probably not even introduced by Europeans. I think the initial introduction that I've seen, and we write about this in our book, we write about this in the book, Being Human Being, that the earliest introduction appears to be in the Hindu religion, because it's in the Hindu religion that you get, first of all, the invasion of the lighter complexion people down into the Indian subcontinent, where you have a Black nation or a Black group of people. And that situation created for them an opportunity to impose an oppressive situation on the majority of the people, and it was a caste system. And that caste system was essentially based on color. That was the first evidence that we could find of when does this happen? Did it happen with the Europeans? No, it didn't happen with the Europeans. It happened first with the Indians and India. And it was happening with the people who considered themselves Brahmin. They then created this system that locked certain people, and particularly if you were Black, you were locked into what they call a varna or a caste, mainly the Sutras and the people that were called Dalits. Dalits actually were uncast. You were basically trash. You didn't even have a caste. You were not in one of the castes. But the other castes were basically based on the color and on complexion. In fact, there was a very interesting article I saw last month that the state of California has now just put the caste system as one of the areas that they have to look at when they're examining ethnic intimidation, because it's something we didn't know about, that in this country, particularly where you have large Indian populations, that internally between the different Indian groups, they are still carrying out the caste system at the University of California. So there are Indian students who say, well, the Brahmin students don't even want me to touch the food. They don't want me to go to the buffet. They want me to sit in a corner and so forth. So we didn't know that. Most of us don't know that. But I'm saying to you that that's a system that is based fundamentally on the concept. They don't call it race, but they call it varna, but it's similar to race. That's the caste system. That's what they created. Then the religious tradition, the Abrahamic religious tradition, created this notion of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and the children of Ham. That's a biblical thing. Again, another religion, you see, that the children of Ham are dark, and because they are dark, they are supposed to be hewers of wood and carriers of water. That's a part of that Abrahamic tradition. The Islamic tradition was the same. The word Abdul and the word Abd, A-B-D, and you see a lot of times African people who are Muslims are called Abdul, because Ab means it is inherited from being a slave. It is black. That's what it means. So you get this tradition that somehow you're separated. In the European tradition, this also took on the form that because people were darker, this was the Europeans, the people were darker, they were less than, they were inferior. Now, this is why it's so interesting to me, is because we knew there were differences in Homo sapien, but we didn't rank them. There were no racial ladders. But Europe came up with the Aryan race at the top. And they say, well, we got the Aryans and the Nordics at the top. This is why President Trump talked about, well, bring us some Nordic immigrants. We don't want any immigrants from, Africa or anywhere like that. Caribbean, we want them from Sweden. Because they had this mentality that Europe imposed was one that was also based on color. And this color classification really was part of the biggest problem that we had, I think, from the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th, and 20th century into the 20th century. So the explanation for conquest was based on race, which was a comprehensive attempt to divide humanity. And that's why we say we have to get back to humanity. We got to get away from race. We got to transform the race discourse, because we sometimes say in college that race is, we sometimes say that race is a social construct. And that's true. That is created. It doesn't exist biologically, because we're, as I say, we're 99.9 the same. So, so what's the problem? It is not just a social construct. It is true that it's not a biological fact, but it is a cultural construct. To me, it is more the culture. It's more that to oppress people, you have to make these distinctions. So people make these, you don't have to make them, but you make these distinctions. Well, you could have said, everybody got blue eyes or inferior. If you were in a powerful position, you can do that. You can say, all the people who got blue eyes, you stand over here because you were inferior. And you can make that you can do social policy on that. You can do political policy on that. You can do voting rights on the basis of that. You can gerrymander people's political ideologies and their voting districts on the basis of their eye color. You could do that because that's a social construction. It's something that's not necessarily a biological fact that one can live with, but it is a system of creating what I call a racial ladder. So I'm gonna stop here and see if there are any questions or comments, but that's basically the idea that I wanted to present, and we can talk from here.
Well, thank you for sharing all the information, very useful. And I want to say for the attendees, if you have questions, please type in the chat box and we are bringing to the attention of our speaker today. Well, I do want to start with a question I have for you. I know in your book, Being Human Being, you talk about race as a myth and race is an illusion, which you spoke of some, but race is the reality of our society. So my question to you is, how do we break down those ideologies of race and how do we promote anti-racism?
You asked a really good question. And it's very good that you asked that question because people always ask that. Dr. Asante, you talking about we want to get rid of race, but there's racism, there's race. It's all about race. Well, that's true. I mean, there are certain things that are created and that exist that are not necessarily real. They can be illusions, you know? I mean, the thing is this, that here's how we do it. And I have some pretty good examples of my own life's experiences of trying to deal with these things. And I'll give you an autobiographical reference point. And most people have never heard of this man, but there was a man named Billy Saul Estes, and very few people have probably heard of him. He was a Texan, and he was a white man who, and I have to say he was white because I'm now using the race discourse. So he was a white man, right? And I met him. He was a very wealthy man when I was in school, and he paid the tuition for 40 Black children to go to a private school. This white man from Texas. This white man from Texas was not only a multimillionaire, but he was also one of the most decent human beings during the period of the 1960s and 70s that I ever met. And he was also a friend to Malcolm X. So now, when I knew, and he got into trouble, financial trouble and all that stuff later on, but when I knew Billy Saul Estes was one of the people that I thought had transcended the notion of race, and that he was beyond that. Okay, and if I remained in the race paradigm myself and in the race discourse, I would say, as a friend of mine, Floyd Rose, said when we met him and we talked to him, Floyd Rose said, he ain't white. That was Floyd's response to me when I'm telling him about Billy Saul, and he met Billy Saul. He said he's not white. He must have some Black in him. He ain't white. No, there's nothing in his history that said that he was of African descent. That was not it. Nevertheless, I also knew about Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court judge, who was Black, who was very dark. But Clarence Thomas has never done anything on the Supreme Court that supported any kind of advancement of Black institutions, even the HBCUs or anything. He's never really done anything that you consider progressive. So now you got a white man who is doing things that are totally different, and you got a Black man who's doing things that if you would say he's Black, he should do such and such. No, it's not like that. That's why you can't go by the race paradigm. If you go by the race paradigm, it will confuse you because you will not understand why white people are acting this way and Black people are acting this way. And that's why I say that the way we get rid of it is the way Ibram Kendi, one of my students, who's written the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. One of the things that Ibram Kendi says that it's not so much about people's color and all of that, but it's about the political policies. You get rid of this stuff by making sure that this is why we have activists. This is why people go and demonstrate. This is why we protest. This is why we have to confront it. This is why when George Floyd is killed, people have to be in the streets, because you have to confront the position and show people this is a stupid situation here. This has nothing to do with anything except you're treating this person as if this person is not human. And in fact, the lack of humanity is what has, lack of the understanding of us as all human, is what has given people the power to simply say, I'm going to make a law that's going to keep you from voting because of where you live and what you look like and so forth and so on. So I think that's the way we have to approach it, Margaret Taylor. I think that we have to approach it by this whole situation of changing the policies. And you change the policies to encourage people to see humanity and not necessarily to see race and to see color or hair texture or anything like that. Ranking of humans is the biggest crime. Ranking of humans. It's the racial ladder that is our problem. It is not our humanity. We're all humans. We're all Homo sapiens.
Well, thank you so much for that response. Very helpful. Bianca, I think you may have had a question or two for Dr. Asante as well. I will check the chat box where you answer your question, ask your question.
Absolutely, Margaret. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Asante, for your discussion and the answer to the first question already. There's so much. This book is mind blowing because you cover so much history in a very short span of time, about maybe 200 pages. You mentioned one of the things. You mentioned the census as counting Egyptian people as white. And when Egypt is very distinctly in North Africa, separated from Europe by the Mediterranean Sea and populated by African people of various shades of brown. So what do you see as the reason that we have historically been encouraged to think of ancient and modern Egypt as white when this just isn't true?
Well, I think that's a good question too. I mean, I think that's at the heart of the educational problem. We're not often aware of changes and situations, and that I mean, I'm thinking right now of the situation with the Russians and the Ukrainians. I mean, I think, which is, again, I mean, it's a long history of stuff that sometimes in the West we're not aware of. But in the case of Egypt, Egypt is in North Africa. It's an African country. And the farther back you go in Egypt's history, the blacker the country is. So there are a couple of things that have happened, I think, that has created this notion of that Egypt is not black. One is the coming of the Arabs to Egypt in 639 AD. The coming of the Arabs from Arabia. Arabs are from Arabia. That's where you get Arabs from. They're from Arabia. The Arabic language is not an indigenous language of Africa. The ancient people of Egypt did not speak Arabic. That is not their language, right? So the conquest of Egypt, if you think of it, is much like the conquest of North America by Europeans. There were people here before the Europeans got here. There were people in New York State before Europeans got to New York State. There were people who lived for thousands of years in those beautiful hills and mountains of New York State. There were people there. So in Africa, in Egypt, it was the same. In 639 AD, the African people in Egypt asked General Al-Az, A.S., who had defeated Jerusalem. They asked him if he would bring his soldiers into Egypt to help the Africans, the Egyptians, throw out the Romans. And when he came in 639, they defeated the Romans at Alexandria, and then they decided that they would stay in Africa. And that's how you get the large population. And then, of course, many others came, and there was fertile ground, much more fertile ground than the deserts in Arabia. And they have come. So that if you go to Egypt today, you go to Cairo, for example, you will see Black people here and there, but for the most part, you see Arab people. So if you're confused, you think, well, the Arabs must have been here forever. And that is, of course, not the case. That's like if you're in New York State, you think that the Europeans have been there forever. That's not the case. So what the situation is that the people who have interpreted Egypt have often interpreted Egypt as if it is an Arab civilization. That is not the case. The more ancient civilization, the civilization of the pyramids, for example, of the tombs at Waset and at Memphis or Menefer, the civilization of geometry and astronomy. That was a Black civilization. The Sphinx is a Black faith, is a statue, a huge statue of a Black person is the Sphinx. It's right there looking at you when you go. So all of this, what this means is that the history has been obliterated, dislocated. And then of course, unless you are like myself, and I've been to Egypt about 15 times, and I take groups to Egypt. You go to Egypt and I ask to see the Black people in the villages. So you go to the Black villages and the Black villagers will give you the history. Most people, they go and they say, well, where do these Black people come from? They've been there all the time. They're either hidden or their land has been taken or their homes have been taken, but Egypt is originally a Black civilization, just like the country next to that is still not completely taken over by the Arabs and will probably not be is Sudan. Sudan is right next door to Egypt. Who are the people in Sudan? The Blackest people in Africa live in Sudan. Just like the people in Egypt at one time were some of the Blackest people who lived on the continent of Africa. So I think that's where the confusion comes. But if you read even the Greek historians who wrote about Egypt, somebody like Herodotus in his book 2, which is called, Herodotus, the book is called Histories, and you go to book 2, he tells you that the people of Egypt were black skinned and woolly hair. This is in the 5th century BC, he's there. So that's the 5th century BC, he said they have black skin and woolly hair. If you go back to the 20th century BC, long before the 5th century BC, they're blacker and blacker, you see. So, but it wouldn't be an issue except that what the creators of the race paradigm tried to do was to take Egypt out of Africa because they could not believe that Black people who had been defined by these Europeans mainly and the Arabs as being inferior could have built the pyramids. So if you take Black people out of Egypt, then maybe you don't have Black people building the pyramids. If you take Black people out of Egypt, then you don't have Black people creating mathematics. If you don't, and so forth and so on. So I think that's basically what happened to that whole situation.
Thank you, sir.
Well, Dr. Asante, you have some questions coming in from the attendees in the webinar. And one of the questions asked, in order to show that they are not racist, most white people tend to say, I do not see color when I look at people. And the response is usually if you don't see color, then you don't really see me. Mm-hmm. So the question is, how will you, or what you would suggest would be the alternative to opening the conversation relating to that topic from a white person point of view?
Well, I would think that that topic, that's why I spent so much time on the question of difference and the question of ranking. If a person said to me, I don't rank people because of their complexion, I don't rank people because of their texture of their hair or the color of their hair. If I don't rank people, I can understand that. That's correct to me. You don't rank people because of color. That's a nice thing. But to say I don't see it, no, I can't believe that. And that's not necessarily the way you respond. You just respond, people are people. People are human beings. When a student comes through my door, I don't care, I don't respond to things like what we call intersectionalities. I don't care what their class is, their economic class, their gender, their color, they're human beings. I respond to humanity. Your response to humanity gets rid of all the intersectionalities that people talk about. And the reason you can respond to humanity is because you're human. And if you're a human, you don't say, I don't see. I can see, but it doesn't make any difference to me. because I'm not ranking you. That's the thing that we have to do. I'm not ranking you. I see you as a human being. And I think that that's what white people say. Don't say I don't see color. We do. We all see color. I see shortness and tallness. I see all of that. But you can rest assured, I'm not making any judgment about you because of those characteristics. You are a human being, and that all human beings deserve dignity. All human beings deserve to be treated with nobility.
Well, thank you for that response. Here's another interesting question. According to the Bible, God created humans on the sixth day. So what is the difference between the origin of Adam and Eve and the origin of Homo sapiens in Africa?
That's a hard question. I don't even know whether I know an answer to that question. I think all sacred texts, probably the Bhagavad Gita, the one that I told you about Hinduism in India, the Gita, the Bible, the Quran, even the great epics of Africa like Mawindo, Awuingi. These are epic creation stories. All creation stories have their points of beginning, but they are only as people in a particular space or place try to explain to themselves and to their children where they came from. But that's different from science. An epic, even if we say it's a religious epic, is different from what science says. We know, for example, that science says that Homo sapiens have been on the earth for around 300,000 years, and that the study that was done in 1985 with 147 placentas from women taken all around the earth, Asia, Africa, and so on, traces back to East Africa. We know that as a scientific fact. So what we know as religious facts or religious faith is different. And sometimes you have to just explain those differences like that.
Okay. And the next question is asking, could you elaborate a bit more about the concept of race as a culture versus social construct?
Good question. Wow. Okay. Here's why I say that's a good question, because when we say something is a social construct, what we mean is that somebody in society had to come up with that term, and then they had to describe what that term is. They came up with the term, and this term of race came up with a system that, as I said, when I was a student, I learned about this. I was trying to think. I think it was like the Aryans were at the top, then the Alpines. The Aryans, they would say, would be the Germans, the Swedes, and so on. The Alpines would be the French, and maybe the Spanish. And then after them, they said there were the Mediterranean people, and the Mediterranean people would be like the Greeks, the contemporary Greeks. And then after the Greeks, rather the Mediterranean, then they would say Asians, you see. And then after the Asians, they would put maybe Africans. And then after Africans, they would put Native Americans or what they call tribal people, right? They'll put all that, and that's a hierarchy. That when we say it's a social construct, we saying somebody. I mean, if African people had the interest in doing such a ladder like this, we certainly wouldn't put ourselves at the bottom. So who created this system? This system was created by a society that basically said, we're going to put ourselves at the top, the Aryans and the Nordics. We're going to put ourselves at the top. We'll put all the other people down below. And at the bottom, we put Africans and Native Americans. And I'm saying to you that this is a construct of a society that has control over other people. However, here's why I say it's that the real problem is it's a culture. It's a culture construct because it comes out of the European sense of classifying. And classifying, and I should say, classifying and rating or ranking. That's a cultural notion that you can classify things, and it's based fundamentally on hierarchy, and it's based on patriarchy too. The first hierarchical system in the world was probably patriarchy, men over women. That was a domination, and the domination. And now it's very interesting that I raised that like this. I say the first hierarchy was patriarchy, which was the domination of men over women. But what the origin of family, for example, will tell you in the writings of many people, particularly like Shaking Out the Joke, is that the first order of society was matriarchal. It was the overthrow of the matriarchy that brought us patriarchy. But that's a whole other discussion. But this notion of hierarchy is a cultural construct. And it's a construct that you see a lot in terms of how people define things. So that's why I say race is social in the sense that, yes, it's a construct that comes out of society, but you have to have a society that believes that you can rank people and you can differentiate, not just differentiate them, but you can rank them as inferior and superior. And inferiority and superiority is a cultural thing.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Asante. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end. Boy, that hour went by really quickly. You all had some great questions. Yes. And I want to add that we have his book, Being Human Being, with his autograph that we're going to have available for a giveaway. And after this session, those who attended will receive an email. And if you're interested in obtaining a copy of that book with the autograph, you have the option to do that. And I would like to thank Bianca from Watertown Juneteenth Action Committee for joining me for this session today. And thank you, Liz, from the Small Business Development Center for helping me with this webinar setup. Very much appreciated. And of course, thank you, Dr. Asante, for your valuable time and for signing the books for us. And we hope to be able to have you as our speaker again sometime in the near future.
All right. Thank you very much. It's my honor, my pleasure, and I really appreciate being with you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asante. Yes.
Right. Bye-bye.
Second what Margaret said.
Thank you.
Good day, sir.
Bye-bye.